Okay, so I don't have anything connected to the beamer, so I don't need the beamer. One of the reasons is that a few years ago, Alan Braslau, he's not here, he was here last year, told me that in many cases it's completely useless to have something beamed if you are talking about it anyway, and it's only distracting. So I will do the same as last year. I will use my phone. The title, Children of Tech, well, if you talk about children use the phone the whole day, so why shouldn't I do it? And I have just new glasses so I can read it again. The theme. I will come back to the children thing later. There are three P words used. So when I read the theme, it was like, okay, premises, predilections, and predictions. Now, I don't know how it's about you, but it doesn't make any sense to me. By the way, the day before I went here, my nephew visited me, and I said, well, we have these themes, and he immediately knew what those terms were, so somehow it's maybe an age thing. So I went on the internet, and I found some definitions, they are in the article, that make a bit more sense to me. So basically it boils down to Dzieci wants to talk about the history of tech, the state of tech, and the future of tech. And that's much shorter and probably better to understand. Now if you talk about kids, I brought a few kids with me. If you ask them what is tech, then they can come here and they come home and still don't know what tech is. You know, they call me tech is people. Tech is people meeting here. Nowadays, two of them can say, tech is the thing that my oldest brother has to use on university to make his reports in. And maybe that rings a bit more bell. The oldest sister, she was here last year. She actually on school, they have some informatics. They have to do something with latex. Sometimes she told her father, who was my colleague. And then a year later, she had to make something for school, a sort of presentation thing, and she was doing that with a girlfriend using context. And sometimes it recognize this, it has a backslash, but you know, it doesn't even ring a bell if you say it's tech or latex, context, whatever. Even the backslash doesn't, you know. So let's not have any ambitions of being here and having people around and then going home and saying, okay, it was about tech and tech is this or that. I'm not sure what the outcome of your inventory will be in that respect. Okay, so to the thing that I want to discuss is how did I come to, and it's actually I think a little bit better in writing than in me speaking, how did it come up with all the things that I'm going to mention and did mention. I read a lot of diverse things. I discuss a lot of these things with my colleague who also reads a lot. And at some point you start, you know, these association between things. You say, okay, if I have to reflect on the future of tech, current state of tech, whatever, I just read this, how can I apply this to this group of people here, to the program that we use, to the development that we have in these programs, etc., etc. And I had just watched 50 hours of socio-biological lectures from a guy at Stanford. I'm not sure if Don knows him, or he knows Don. And, you know, it put a lot of things that I've read about in perspective. And again, that sets you thinking about the things, what are you doing, why are you doing it, and how do these things operate. Okay, so the last month, I just walked around and had this, okay, there's this conference, you note things down, you write things down, you read something, okay, I can associate it this and that. So what happens is you get a big rambling of thoughts and other unstructured thingies. I will quickly go stepwise through a couple of these things. I will start with words. I will go to memes. From memes I will go to groups whatever. From there I will go to religion. From religion I will go to intelligence. Then I will enter with chaos, maybe a little bit of evolution. In there I could spend some words on economy. Eventually we can also speak about evolution. I have to enter with children, of course, and then eventually the future will be covered a little bit. So this is already a bit of rambling of different areas and different things that we can draw ideas from. Okay, text is about words. You know, you put words on paper, you put words next to each other, and we have, we call it typesetting, but basically it's about words. There are very interesting talks about this topic on the internet. That's the nice thing about YouTube by Daniel Dennett, philosopher, who describes words as the things that are somehow, they exist in your brain, but you don't really know what they are. They are there. You use them to, you know, to somehow create ideas. They're part of your thought. But what they are is very hard to describe. You can also say, I hear words. They're also a bit like sounds that you make up in your head. Words also relate to language. Language is something that somehow very well suits what we are. Kids learn language automatically. You don't have to teach it. They don't do it. Your dog doesn't do it. If you talk to your dog, it doesn't talk back. At some point, kids start talking back. And so it's something that's also very natural to us. Because at some point we could describe things and discuss things and whatever, we could transfer knowledge, we could transfer culture and whatever. So alongside our, let's say, the more biological, mechanical, biological thing that we are, cultural things could be passed on. Now, if you look at where we are now, you know, at some point we started putting words on paper. And then before we actually got there, we didn't have paper, we had to cut them in stone, or we had to scratch them into something, we had to use wood or whatever. But eventually we ended up with something paper, and paper is what we are here about, because we use programs and tools and whatever to get stuff on paper. But if you think where we come from, you know, from things that originate in our head, eventually make it onto some kind of medium, then the question is, what will the future bring? Will it still be on paper? Or will they again live in our minds only, you know, if we are connected with whatever kind of means to each other? We have already the internet and things like that. Words now move on electric media, things like that, not necessarily on printing. But we are still very printing and paper oriented now. So from that on you can ask then the question like, if you have these, you build these sentences into your head, there's not something like hyphenation going on. There's no paragraphs, there is no line break, there's nothing whatever. It's just a stream of something. You got away from that stream by putting stuff on paper, which actually is still a bit of a stream, you know, if you think of this long sentence that we tend to break into pieces because they have to fit on the page. But why should there be? And why should there actually be a page? If you look at HTML files, it's already one long thing. We have a lot of trouble here in breaking things into lines, in breaking things into pages, which might as well be considered completely ridiculous concepts in the future. But it's still something that we come here and bark about and think that so I want to do a little bit of exercise. I actually borrowed it also from one of Daniel's talks. Try to imagine in your head a beautiful typeset page. Close your eyes, try to imagine. Can you actually imagine a beautiful typeset page? How many people can? I can't. But okay. So what font is used? How many hyphens are there in a row? In the third line? How wide are the margins? It's more difficult than it uses different examples. Yeah? Imagine this private standing on the beach, and then I can imagine that does it have a belt? Yeah? You know, you cannot really imagine it. We think that we can imagine the usual way. And this is how we talk to each other. TeXa is so good in typesetting, blah, blah, blah. We have a complete idea about what it's good in, but we cannot actually describe it. Somehow, a bit of abstract too. That should make us a bit humble. Because if you see that text typeset by an HTML browser, or by MS Word, or by TeX, I'm pretty sure that if we would really go to the test here, a lot of people will fail to recognize what TeX has typeset. They probably recognize the font, if they recognize the font. Because it's a very distinctive font. But if you use some kind of font that nobody here has ever seen before, I'm pretty sure a lot of people will fail to recognize it. I will fail, I can tell you that. I might have mentioned it before. There's a book about digital typography that I read long ago, and it was typeset on the Macintosh using MS Word. At that time it was on the Mac somehow version of Word. And I was really surprised to see that because it looked pretty well for that time. Okay, words. We had something like, saying like, we want to spread the word. What does it mean? If you look at the way evolutionary biologists describe how we evolve, there's also something in addition to the genotype, like what you can say, the memotype. We don't only pass genes, but somehow we are being hijacked by things like memes. These can be cultural entities or whatever, and they somehow travel with us. It's a thing that maybe even subconscious parents transfer to kids, society transfers to kids too. So somehow culture travels with us. Now, in order to be successful in that, it had to be a good meme. There's some things I can tell you something, you don't remember it the day after. Yesterday, when we drove here to Bakkerteg, I pointed out to Teun that a lot of these truck trailers that you see were made by the same company in Germany. What's the name of that company?
Smith.
He never knew it before. Yeah? And now he remembers it. If I see the name Smiths at the back of the truck, you know, once I started noticing that was cut into metal and there was a hole in that. After that I always look at it and say, oh, the thing. I, of course, associated it with one of the more active contact users too, which is a different thing that makes it easier to remember. But this is what actually happened. I tell him something, he remembers it, it travels with him. Maybe when he has kids and these trucks are still around, yeah, he will pass it on to his kid. Now the thing is, he knows Google, he knows Facebook, he knows all the other things, but he doesn't know, or didn't know yet, that Smiths is a pretty big, must be a pretty big German company, because you see, if you look at all the trailers, most of them are made by this company. So this is how something that might be big in use here and small in the mind of somebody there will be remembered. And that is something that we can do with TeX. I was talking about my nephew who has to use TeX at university, he has to use it. And just believe me, it's no fun. Yeah? He has to use it because it's collaborative, whatever. Of course, as is the case with many things, if you go to a lot of experience, you can have a lot of bad experience. If the last part of the experience is good, you will remember the good. So, it depends a bit on how they leave university. If it was really a struggle, like Moitza had with her thesis, then you will, I hate that from now on. Otherwise, it will be, you know, a positive thought. In my job, most of the people that really don't know anything about tech, occasionally you run into especially if you do mouse-related things. Oh yeah, TeXa, I remember that. Yes, it can do typesetting, blah blah blah. So there's some kind of positive remembering. This meme has somehow been planted into this person that 20, 30 years later they still think it's good. Maybe they hated it at that time. Maybe they haven't even used it, but somehow it's stuck. This is a lesson that we should take. We should not always try to convince people. Just make sure that they remember. It would actually be good enough. So conferences like these, they can be used to inject memes in our wetware. And user groups are, I would call, basically meme organizers, meme injectors. Okay, so let's move on to groups. At some point, some 10,000 years ago, hunters became farmers. And before that, nobody had any possession, nobody had anything. You traveled from place to place. And, but they had to stay on the same place, so they started to organize themselves. They became groups. It also permitted them to do observations from this one place where they were staying. So they could look at the stars, they could look at etc. So scientists basically. One characteristic of these groups is that normally these bands that were traveling around were not too large. And when they became large, they split. When you put a lot of groups together, a lot of people together, it will become so large that you have to organize things beyond that they, you don't want them to hit each other on the head constantly. So you have to have more organization, laws, whatever kind of things. But on the other hand, we still have this limitation that we cannot handle too large groups. Now, this is interesting if you look at user groups. Is there any really large user groups? Dante can call itself large, but is it large compared to the amount of users in Germany? Turkey is actually a ridiculously small user group. If you look at the number of users in the world, whatever. Comparable to, it's kind of interesting that you now see in the Netherlands it's declining a little bit. So somehow they should seek kind of optimum. It doesn't make sense to look for 10 or 20 or 50,000 members. It doesn't work that way because they will split off and become smaller groups again. So to some extent we are still the hunters. We cannot handle these large groups. We just split off, and this is just large enough to know each other and to have fun. So, to come back to the theme, don't be too ambitious in your goals about big. Okay, well, yeah, this is also an interesting one. There has been research by Sapolsky on these baboons. What happens is that, it's a nice example, you have these alpha males. Alpha males, they probably have them also in these groups. They on top of the food chain. So these baboons, at some point they ran into a dump, a garbage dump, and they fed themselves at the dump. Now who get the first food? These male baboons, the alpha male. And it was poisoned stuff. So who died first? The alpha man. And from that on, the lower ranked male were the dominant one, but they were actually not dominant in the sense of male, because the females had more control over these, let's say, beta males. And from that on, every other male that joined the group had to adapt. So these are, they formed a sort of different society. So there was no way that a new alpha man could show up. He had to, they constantly are doing these kinds of things, so they had to adapt. I do like to do that, okay. Then he said, next week, yeah, so that's grooming and whatever kind of stuff. So maybe, if you are such a group, you can join them, but you have to adapt yourself. You have to fit in somehow. There's no way you can dominate this world. You cannot buy yourself into this community. Sometimes these things happen. Okay, I mentioned if a lot of people get together, you have to get them organized. And one of the things that plays a role in that is religion. Now this is always a bit of a tricky topic if you discuss religion. There are quite interesting videos on the internet about these topics. But a lot of that has to do with setting up a social system. I'm currently reading a book about basically an evolutionary view in the Bible by a couple of German guys. And it's quite interesting to see how you see that more often nowadays. Views on topics from completely different areas, like anthropology and whatever. And what they clearly explain is that a lot of the stories that you find in there are actually needed to go from the transition to what were needed to get this group go from the transition from hunters to farmers, larger societies, which are competing, which have to fight over resources and things like that. And stories evolve, and stories are adapted to the situation to give, groups certain reason for being or organizing themselves. Inventing stories that help you establish this society. So the question then is, the other thing is that if you talk about religion, it's not necessarily some deity involved. It can also be, social liberalism can be a religion too. I think it's only recently that last decades that they start to think like that. But you can see it on a broader thing. Okay, so how does religion relate to technisch?